Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran, paying $300,000 for a music video that will get 96 views on YouTube, or else a scrappy upstart shooting a viral music video on your Android, this is your show, because ultimately it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the last Friday of March 2022, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Vern who drove a seafoam green Mercury Sable, who was always trying to sell you bath salts that he claimed were male libido enhancers. And old Vern would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now, you guys. That's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. Bandzoogle is one of those nice things. It powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in. Hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to sell your music and merch commission-free. Listeners to the Working Songwriter podcast can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Use the promo code TWS to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming weeks, the first Sunday night of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern, I'm over on my YouTube channel for Sunday Songs. That's a live stream. I'm live. I'm playing tunes. I'm taking questions in the live chat. I'm taking requests in the live chat. It's a really fun, really interactive experience. I dare to say that we're building something of a little community over there, including many people who are listeners to this podcast. So come on over and be a part of it. The first Sunday night of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern over on YouTube. Head on over to YouTube or go to joepugmusic.com, actually. That's a better place to do it. And click on the live stream tab to set a reminder. Finally, if you enjoyed this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First, you could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon. You search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription, a subscription that you certainly don't have to pay, but that you choose to pay because you dig the show and because you won't miss a few bucks at the end of the month. If just 1% of our listenership would kick in the price of a cup of coffee every month, it would make an immense difference. So thank you to everybody who has taken the time and the coin to go over there and do that. I really appreciate it. If you're not in a place where you can contribute in that way, I totally get it. You can still help us out in a couple ways that are entirely free. First, you could leave us a rating in the iTunes store. Or second, you could simply tell a friend about the show. Spread the word about the show. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Okay, I'll end all the harassment right there. Steve Forbert, I've been a huge fan of his for decades now. I've seen him play live more than once, and an interview like the one that you're about to hear, this is exactly why I started this podcast 5 or 6 years ago. So I enjoyed this immensely, and I hope that you do too. Our guest this week has spent 5 decades and over 20 albums writing and recording critically acclaimed songs. Steve Forbert originally hails from Meridian, Mississippi, where he got his start playing in what sound like basically teen idol rock bands. He outgrew that milieu quickly, though, and sought his fortune in the streets of 1970s New York City. Forbert's debut album, Alive on Arrival, became one of 1978's most acclaimed records. Rolling Stone contributing editor David Wild recently reflected that now or then you would be hard-pressed to find a debut effort that was simultaneously as fresh and accomplished, comparing it to a great first novel by a young author who somehow managed to split the difference between Mark Twain and J.D. Salinger. Forbert's second album, Jackrabbit Slim, released in 1979, achieved RIAA Gold record status on the strength of its hit single, Romeo's Tune, which reached number 11 on the Billboard charts. Forbert's songs have been covered by Keith Urban, Roseanne Cash, Marty Stewart, and John Popper. Forbert has released 20 studio albums, including a Grammy-nominated tribute to Mississippi legend Jimmie Rodgers. Forbert was the recipient of the 2020 Governor's Arts Award in his home state of Mississippi, having already been inducted into the Mississippi Musicians Hall of Fame in 2016. It was a great honor to host Steve Forbert on this podcast. I thank him and everybody on his team, and I hope that you dig our chat. Okay, fair enough. Well, listen, thanks so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter podcast. I really appreciate it. Your music would eventually become known when you were based out of New York City, but in fact, your journey began many, many miles away from Gotham. And so I'm hoping to start out here. You can give us a picture of what life looked like when you were growing up in Meridian, Mississippi.
Well, I wish I could, at a later today, send you a couple of photos of. Can you see me?
I can't, but that's okay because this is just audio only.
Okay. Good quality. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Well, you can thank Steve Greenwell for that. I'm here at his studio.
Thank you, Steve.
So I would send you just a couple of pictures of some skinny kids playing guitars in, rock and roll bands. That would tell you what it was like. But it was so much fun, and it gave us a real outlet as opposed to football, basketball, swimming team, you name it, And that was just true for thousands of us, as you know, Joe. So what was it like? Let me ask you to please rephrase the question.
Well, I suppose even before music, you started playing it yourself. When did music start to kind of worm its way into your brain before you played? What's some of the first music you remember hearing? Was it over the radio? Was it someone in your house playing it? Was it at church? What are some of your earliest memories of music affecting you?
Broadly speaking, it would be church, because I was raised in the Baptist church. And so although they were preaching and doing the whole thing of the Bible, music was omnipresent with the church. And so that was happening. And I was listening to things on the radio, and it would be stuff like Peggy Lee, maybe her version of Fever, way back. I remember Go Away Little Girl. I think it was Steve Lawrence. And that was a record I heard over and over on the radio. So there would be just some random things like that. And then time went by, the Beatles came out and all that. Okay, very appealing. But for my sensibility, when Terry Melcher and Jim Dixon got the Byrds together to record Mr. Tambourine Man. That just did it. I don't know how they did it. I mean, we know that Hal Blaine played drums and Larry Knechtel played bass. McGuinn himself was on the record playing 12-string and singing. And it just was magic, that single. And they were magic for a while there. And I could go on and on about it because it's my understanding that by the time the next single was recorded, Michael Clark had gone from bongos to awesome on drums. And I still think he's underrated. And he played drums on Turn, 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 and Hillman played bass. And so they were off and flying, if you'll pardon the pun. So it was the Byrds, really, that was more than the Beatles. It's like, I think I can do this. Maybe it was the folk thing. I don't know.
So when you thought to yourself, I think I can do this, and you mentioned that you had, some pictures of some skinny kids in bands trying to do it, what did it look like when you started those first bands? I mean, now when a kid starts a band, they go on YouTube, they figure out how to play. Maybe there's a little club in town that they go to. What were the opportunities that you had to gig around Meridian, Mississippi back then?
Well, this is pretty funny. I tried to play guitar properly, and it was boring me to death, scales and diminished chords and theory and all that from this old cat in Meridian who was a guitar teacher. He was probably 60-something at the time. And so I got disenchanted with that, but somebody said, you need to work with, you need to meet Miss Harvey. And this gal was a big old gal who was a cousin of Jimmy Rogers.
Wow.
Yeah, and she was probably 50-something. And she had done her best. She was going to pick up some extra cash and teach guitar. But her thing was just singing and playing simple songs. And she converted what said to have literally been a chicken coop in her backyard down there, down the slope. And they ran some power down there. And she used to do these 30-minute lessons. Maybe they were an hour. And you'd learn a song, and then over the next week, you'd learn. I'll tell you this. You would say, okay, I want to learn Play With Fire by the Rolling Stones. She'd pick up a copy of Hit Parader magazine. That would be her internet. And her daughter would write out the lyrics from the issue that contained Play With Fire. And they would get some chords and put them over there. And of course, there'd be 4 chords or something. And they would, so next week, that would be prepared for you because you said, I want to do Play With Fire by the Rolling Stones. And so, great. And so they'd give you the handwritten lyrics. Her daughter, Ann, had written them out. And you would learn the song for next week. And the lesson mainly consisted of your performance of the song. So, and I loved it, that got me into singing, and I was comfortable with that. I was not comfortable with Mel Bay's book of guitar inversions. And so she was a bit of an organizer, did some charitable work, and she was connected out at the East Mississippi State Hospital for the mentally ill. And every Saturday, they would have what they called a dance for the patients, Saturday morning, in the rec center. So that was, aside from doing some things at the church, that was our first show. And the patients would hold hands and walk in a circle around the rec center while we played. I assume we were somewhat in tune, who knows? But that was it. And so that when you say what was it like? That's what it was like. Yeah.
Well, I'd imagine that a certain population of kids at that time picked up guitars, played in their communities. A very smaller percentage of that would actually take it upon themselves to travel across the country to the cultural mecca of New York City and try to make a go of it there. What made you want to get to New York City, first of all? And then second of all, how the hell did you get there and actually make that plan work and happen in real time?
Well, I don't want to skip the thing in between there, which was we put together these bands.
Oh, okay.
And she encouraged us, and she would sometimes suggest a drummer or somebody who had a bass or this, that, and the other. And so you say, sure. And so we branched out playing. We ranged a little bit to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, University of Alabama, or down to a college in Mobile, Alabama. Or we might go down and play Waynesboro, Mississippi. So we branched out a bit. We played the Hippie Club in Jackson, which was painted with day-glow paint and sounded atrocious. It was just another warehouse made of concrete. But those places were in every town would have the people who says, like, we want to smoke dope, drop acid, and have psychedelic music. Let's have a club. And so they would do their best, and it would be some cinder block place that used to store tires or something. So we played a lot of shows, and that was really fun. For a while, of course, we didn't even have a fucking driver's license. So one of the dads would kindly drive us. My mother took us to we would rent the U-Haul trailer, which was logistics,
Yes.
Get that together by 2 p.m, get the trailer and get the lights working because we got to drive to equipment, or whatever. So there was that whole chapter, and then started writing songs, and I wanted to do more, original material, and that meant we couldn't play the teen center in Quitman. They didn't want to hear my songs.
Right.
What was that? They wanted to hear Color My World by Chicago, man, Okay. So I went to New York City, and I just, I couldn't get anybody in the current band to go with me. I don't blame them. And so I just did it. I got out of junior college and went for it.
What did the city look like when you arrived there? It seems like that in the 70s then, there was sort of like, there was sort of a melange of different music scenes going on at that point, because you had this insurgent kind of punk and new wave music just starting to hit the shores and get started. Then I think you still had some kind of stalwart folk music players that were still active in the city. So can you kind of describe the cultural landscape as you found it and where you fit in once you got there?
Well, I was just going for whatever was waiting for me, if you will. Of course, nothing was waiting for me. But I just said, okay, I'm going down to Greenwich Village. Duh. Okay, so I went down there and I saw the legendary, which would have been the second carnation of Folk City. And I just started sniffing around, and I learned pretty soon that you had to do the hoot nights, and it could take a while to actually get onto the stage. Now, if you went on Tuesday night, Folk City, that was pretty expedient. You could draw a number, and if I had to wait till midnight to do 1 or 2 songs, then I would wait till midnight. And the whole process was you're seeing all these other people in the same thought process. So it's fascinating because most of them were doing original material. Some of them were reading poetry, and some of them were from Illinois, and some of them were from, shall we say, North Bergen, New Jersey, or out on the island. But it was a real step up for me because I'd just been putting it together as best I could in Mississippi, playing, Rock and Roll Hoochie Coo by Johnny Winter in a rock and roll band. And so there you go. To make a long story short, I was able to scrounge around and play some of these places. I worked my way up to the bitter end after like a year and opened a show or two for Dave Van Ronk, and that was great. And then at some point I ventured over to CBGB's because I was out of options. Where else can I go? And that was a bit illogical because I'm carrying around a 0018 Martin, and I went in there, but it just kind of worked out. I went in the afternoon, and they were nice people. Charlie Martin, the sound man, and Hilly Crystal, they were nice people, and they gave me a shot. So I did that too, solo as an opener for, at the time, Talking Heads was a trio. That was wild. I was a fan of John Cale, and he brought in a loud, intense band, and I opened a couple of nights for him. So stuff like that. So it was very colorful.
What do you think you took away creatively or aesthetically from those kind of strange bedfellows gigs over at CBGB's?
I think most of all, just scuffling on my own. I started out, I did a bit of singing in the streets. So when Charlie Martin and I used to go in and do demos in the afternoon, solo things, and Charlie would record me on a reel-to-reel, and I was intent on that. And then I would listen to it and critique it and stuff. And I could just hear from those tapes that I wasn't really, the city itself after a year and a half just kind of toughened up my sound, as you would expect. And that was very helpful. That was the difference between, the kid from Mississippi with acoustic guitar to something I could actually present and maybe get a record deal. It just toughened it up.
That's interesting. It's such a difference between now and then, because now basically anyone with a MacBook and a USB mic can make a quote-unquote record and have it uploaded to Spotify within a week, which is basically publishing it to the world. But the time period that you're talking about then, you really had to have something going on to even get a record recorded and released. So who first heard those demos of yours that believed in it and thought that it actually could be a record and go on to be made and released?
Well, it's all in. I'll briefly plug the book because I put all of this in a book I wrote, a memoir of, and a lot of it's in from these times, because these times are, when you're scuffling and feeling your way out there, that's really colorful. So a lot of it's in the book. But to answer your question, there was an attorney named Harold Ornstein. He took an interest, and he had a scout that would look around the village. And I think he was a kind person and did have my best interest. But he wanted to cultivate a client, and he helped me some, sending out some home cassette demos, which was futile. That wasn't going to happen. I mean, Bob Fiden at Arista was probably getting 30 of those a week, So anyway, Danny Fields came by CBGB's at Hilly's recommendation, and he took an interest. So that's really probably the answer to your question.
Can you describe the writing and the recording of that debut, Alive on Arrival? How did you put that record together, both from the writing end and recording end?
Well, that's your proverbial first record. Some of those songs went all the way back to Mississippi. So they were 2 years old. What kind of guy? I had started Midsummer Night's Toast down there, which was just out of my fantasy of some sort of Greenwich Village scenario. I didn't know what I was talking about, but it turned out to be accurate. And I did wind up singing around at sunset with all these characters in Washington Square Park and listening to their stories, and that happened. So, I'm just trying to remember exactly the question here.
Well, can you talk a little bit that's a bit about the writing. Can you talk about the recording process there? Like, had you been in a studio before, been around anyone making a proper record? If not, what did that feel like? And how did you get up to speed to make that first professional recording?
Well, I freaking love that question. The thing is, in Mississippi, we had Malaco, which I never went to. Don't ask me why. I never went to Jackson to Malaco Records. They were primarily gospel and blues and rhythm and blues anyway. And a guy named David Huff had a studio in Laurel. And he produced a single for us and later a demo album. Us being me and my friend Clay Barnes, who was an excellent electric guitar player, an excellent musician. And so I always say, much like what you just said about Pro Tools and a USB, you had to have done something before you ever even saw a Neumann microphone, So I just like all that stuff. And so you had to work your way up to actually touching a Neumann or that kind of deal. And then when I got to New York, I did a couple of demos at my own expense because there were plenty of demo studios suddenly in Manhattan. Yeah. There were rumored to be 3 in Mississippi. I think maybe there were only 2 studios. But anyway, so I did these demos up at Times Square, and I would get these tapes and listen to them and critique them and send them around to no avail because it's just a waste of time, People getting tapes in the mail, it's like, yeah. So then I did some demos with Jonathan Richman in the basement of Sire Records. Ah. Seymour Stein was kind enough to let us come in there and, record something. And that was with Jonathan and the Modern Lovers. So that was fun, and I liked Jonathan and was a fan of his. And Danny was facilitating all of this, Danny Fields, and his partner, Linda Stein, who had been married to Seymour Stein. Okay. And then word got out around the village that I'd gotten an actual record contract, which was likely going to be with a major label unless it was with Philo Records or Rounder or, a few folk labels. But things had worked out, and we had decided, and we got some offers after a nice write-up, John Rockwell in the New York Times, and we elected to go with Nat Weiss, who I loved, and he had a satellite label with Epic called Nemperor. And so what to do, a friend of mine gave me a record Steve Berg had produced on somebody from Virginia, a harmonica player. And I listened to the record, and I just thought, well, this is honest, it's clear, it's simple, it's organic. And so I asked him to produce my record. He was a complete unknown. But that was good, Joe, because the last thing I wanted would be to work with, shall we say, who produced the first television record?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think it was Glenn Johns. I forgot. But anyway, I didn't want to get into something that was, out of my control. And Steve Berg was not a big name, Jimmy Iovine, sort of some guy with going to get me a big power station drum sound.
Right.
I had a fear of that. And so it all worked out because Steve was a great guitar player. He's not with us anymore, but I've worked with some good ones. And And he knew the very guys to call for what I had developed, as a folk rock village kid. And we rehearsed in his apartment, and we got it together, and then we went into one of the Phil Ramone studios, AR1, I think it was called. I'm not sure. And Glenn Berger engineered it, and he was perfect. He was very good. And there you go. Hugh McDonald on bass, fantastic. Barry Lazarowitz on drums was wonderful. Robbie Condors, people know that name. He's a great keyboard player. And that was our core band. Harvey Shapiro played a little pedal steel, and nobody complained about that.
I love hearing that was a conscious decision of yours to not want to go with some big name producer that was going to put, the voice of God drums behind it, because what I've always really loved about your records is they're singer-songwriter records with a band, that are enhanced by a band, that are not taken over by a band. And I find so often people miss the sweet spot in between. Either it just stays singer-songwriter and it's still kind of like a black and white sketch of what could have been a beautiful painting, or it goes too far to the other side where you have these, again, pounding voice of God drums that are more about a band than they are about the tunes themselves. And so it's just really interesting that you always had that vision, because to me as a listener, it's always come across.
Well, those are the two extremes you really don't want. I had no desire to make a solo record in front of a couple of mics. To me, it could be good, but would I myself want to listen to it more than 7 times? Probably not.
Right.
You do want to be entertained by records on some level. You do. And so, that was the thing. I loved, for example, Jackson Browne's first record. They call it Saturate Before Using. And that was an accident. It just wound up on the print of the sleeve. But anyway, that was really nice. David Crosby sang harmonies, and the band was excellent, but it didn't overpower kind of a regular little guy.
Right.
And I found that record to be charming. That was a good one.
Getting better at your instrument is an essential part of being a songwriter. When you play better guitar, you write better songs. It's that simple. How do you do that, though? Sure, you could get lessons from the neighbor who studied noise music at Bard College, but they'll charge you through the nose. Or else, you could pull up YouTube and pay nothing at all, but then you'll just end up sifting through videos of nerds unironically weeping as they play the intro to Mr. Brightside. What's the sweet spot in between? Peghead Nation, the online home for American roots music. They feature curated video workshops with world-class instructors on guitar, mandolin, banjo, fiddle, upright bass, dobro, and ukulele. They have levels of instruction that meet the needs of both scrappy upstarts and grizzled veterans, and most importantly of all, it comes in at a low monthly subscription that actual strapped-for-cash songwriters can afford. To start taking classes yourself, head on over to pegheadnation.com to check out their 50 available courses and enter the promo code TWS, the initials of our show, to get your first month free. You can also send a gift subscription to the songwriter in your life or to the player in your band who needs a not-so-subtle hint about their playing prowess. Peghead Nation, when you play better guitar, you write better songs. It's that simple. Something that I really respect about Steve is that through every era of his career, he has refused to put on the face that was expected of him. He wouldn't play cover songs in the nicer clubs in Mississippi because he wanted to play his own. He stepped onto the stage at CBGB's in New York to open for television, not with some new wave project, but with his own idiosyncratic folk songs. And in the 1990s, instead of trying to retool and sound like all the other bands that were climbing the charts, he stood pat. As you can hear from him talking about it all, it wasn't because he didn't understand what was at stake. In fact, he knew exactly what the score was. It just wasn't worth it for him to pretend to be anything else other than what he was. And there's a poem by David Biespiel that not only speaks to the question of what kind of face we're all expected to put on in daily life, but also name-checks Forbert's home state of Mississippi in a title that is an homage to a famous Nina Simone song. It's entitled Mississippi Goddamn. Here in this strumming light, which the generations can't downshift out of, and with the land gushing its courtesies of iron, and the shallow mercies caustic or strangely gussied up like dogs with dark collars, I lose my rest. And what druthers I had are just trouble now, unconditional, all in the air. What's got me upset are the dead. They go too slow. They're just plain rotten. Even a beating heart hardly tingles. The crimes, the land, the lost second sight, the prayers, none of these are picking the cotton out of the lies. And no banter between the roots and the tombs. And no thoughts boycotting the feelings. The old rooms, the shadow towns, the rebel yelling, the Confederate daughters, and the themes of homesteads get hushed in the months-long heat. I've gotten too damn lazy to pluck a duplicate heart, unearth a body, a song, and I just don't know what kind of fly. That's just the trouble. The genie's not gentle. The stomach can't stomach the risk of being right, good, unknown. Me. And if I race to the dry river where the bodies are pushing through, the bones peering like children from behind a curtain of dirt, then who shall judge the living? And if that's a test, what frown is needed? What game face does everybody know to put on? What hoof? What blood? So when Alive on Arrival comes out, Romeo's tune becomes a bona fide hit on the radio, I believe on actually AM radio, in fact. And how did that change your life, and what did it feel like as it was happening?
Well, I have to correct you, but Alive on Arrival, I deliberately left Romeo's tune out of the recordings for that record.
Oh, pardon
then
me.
We did Jackrabbit Slim.
Pardon me. Okay.
So there you go. And so then I was ready to bring in some of my more pop efforts at, songwriting. And I didn't want to just tell this little autobiographical story, which I relegated to Alive on Arrival. And so, yeah, then we worked hard at it. John Simon was producing, and we did 3 or 4 attempts at it, Romeo's tune specifically. And we got something we were happy with, and it did open the doors, as a hit single will do.
So what did that look like? Like, how did your life change on the ground on a day-to-day basis when that started to take off? Well,
I was affiliated with Epic Records, so when I wanted to have a band to promote Alive on Arrival, that happened. Steve Berg helped me audition some players from, you name it, way out in Queens to New Jersey, whatever. And we even found a guitar player in Roanoke, Virginia. And we put together a band, and we did touring to promote Alive on Arrival. So I was already running all over the place, doing the thing. I don't know if we had a bus, but we had our major label support. And so really, when we found that we had our single on our hands, it was getting airplay, we might have bumped up to a buzz. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But and we went as far, of course, that we had offers from Japan suddenly and stuff like that. I'd been to Germany before Alive on Arrival even came out, or right after it's playing solo. So the single didn't radically just start all of that. It was already in the works, but I wasn't very much in demand, and so it just kind of got a little more big time, if you will.
Yes.
Having the hit single.
Now, to take a more big picture look now, to kind of pull out, you've released 20 records over your career, over 20 records, I believe, at this point. What does it take from a character or personal standpoint to play music over the long haul like that, to continue to produce creative and vital work?
Well, it's for the longest time, it was never a problem because there was a freaking record industry. And so you would be making vinyl records, and you would be associated with a proper label, and they would have a team and they would promote them. And there was a radio structure of good old land terrestrial radio, and it all, even though it was kind of crazy and always, you could get lost in it, but it was very logical, and so I just kept doing it because maybe I wasn't. It's all in the book. I made 2 records for Geffen, and I was getting lost at the time. They were doing Aerosmith, and then they were doing Guns N' Roses, and I just, there wasn't really a name for what I did. And so the Streets of This Town and the American and Me were, if you will, they were lost in the shuffle of what was happening. That's the way it goes with time, I mean, you can bet John Fred and his Playboy band were fucking lost in the shuffle of, shall we say, the Jefferson Airplane, White Rabbit. That's what happens. And it really hasn't been till all of this digital thing that it got challenging, because you just have to have the drive to just, want to write songs and record them and play. And if it's not as logical anymore, and it isn't, then okay, you can have a Facebook page and this, that, and the other, but you just have to. For me, I guess it's force of habit, but it was always logical until this digital thing, and then the bottom fell out.
What does that force of habit look like for you when you have a day set aside to write? If you do set them aside to write, like what does your writing process look like? Is it something that you're constantly doing, or something that you do in the build up to a record?
I'm constantly doing it. It's phrases and things that I think are appealing, and then I'll write them down, and they accumulate. And when I force myself to slow down from other activities, then I'll look at what musical ideas, riffs and things, just like everybody, or I'll look at some of my phrases and things that might trigger a song or a story in a song. So it's a thing you're always working at, because you don't want a good idea to get away from you, but I don't set aside a day, and I don't. And then you're always working. See, that's the beauty of the old system, Joe, because in the old system, you could say, I'm always working. I'm trying to write the best songs I can. I've got 8. I can't make an album with 8, because you're thinking in terms of album, but you're working toward, as you said, working up to making an album. But it's, as time goes by in the next few years, an album is just going to be a forgotten notion, probably. Whatever. So you just go on with that. I'm 67 now, so I've had a hell of a run. If I were 27 right now, it really put a damper on, accumulating a body of work.
Yes. No, absolutely. I mean, the new thing with that is every time I've done this process in the last 10 years, every time I finish with a record and put it out, I just think to myself, like, man, that was a lot of time and treasure put into something where people, the most to listen to it of it is maybe one or two of the songs. It's like, but we spent a lot of time and money making the other 12 songs on there, man. You know?
Yeah. But that's the problem is our mindset. You know, it's that wonderful old thing that you would say like, okay, let's say Graham Parsons has started a new group with Chris Hillman, and they've squirreled away and they've written some songs, but they got to make an album, and A&M is interested, so they need a couple more things. So you're always thinking about a nice statement, if you will, 10 or 11, 12 songs. So they decide to record Dark Into the Street, or they decide to do a guy singing Do Right Woman. So why? So that's what Graham wants to do, or, you know, so, okay, well, sure. And so they did. And so you would just be thinking of that. And the mindset would demand that you have 40 minutes or so of presenting yourself. And that was the, if you will, that was the currency of it. You know, that was the, and so we can't expect it to stay like that forever. You know, a lot of us have enjoyed some really great work of a lot of variety, from Iggy Pop, you know, Funhouse to, you know, okay, Bridge Over Troubled Water, you know. So that's the way it's been.
What do you think, over all these decades of writing songs, what do you think that you've improved at the most songwriting-wise? What have you had to really learn and work at and get better at to continue to write songs?
Well, anybody can write songs if they've got a paper and a piece of paper and a pen, especially if they can remember them. And then you record them on your phone now. So there you go. That's done. Strange, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, I used to put these ideas on a cassette machine that ran on batteries, and I accumulated like a couple of hundred of them, you know, with bits and pieces. And so, let me see. What I'm trying to say is, would you say that again?
Well, yeah, just the question is, like, all this time writing songs, like, how has your songwriting process changed? And is there any specific part of the process that you've built up like a muscle that you've gotten better at over time? Like, you're better right now at 67 than you were at age 27 at doing this when writing a song.
That's debatable. You when you have all the excitement and inspiration of youth, and if you have the innate ability to write a good song, have I written a better song than Romeo's Tune, or you know? No, not the general public would say, I don't remember who this guy is. You know, said Romeo's Tune. Oh yeah, that okay. It'd be like me saying somebody, do you know Al Stewart? And they go, no. And I go, well, listen to this. It's Year of the Cat. Oh, okay. So I just try to keep the quality up to where I say that I'm finished with this song, or I think I'm finished with it. And I say it's good enough to possibly record in a studio and put it out there. So that's the thing. I'm trying to get better at making records. I'm here now with Steve Greenwell. He's helped me immensely here, and he's produced, mixed, and recorded the new record called, yes, folks, it's called Moving Through America. So that's the thing that you start to realize, is that it's like Eric Clapton said years ago, we never paid attention to who the engineer was. We didn't care. It's just some guy behind the glass turning knobs. And then they met Tom Dowd. They liked what they were hearing, and they started to appreciate the fact that we're not just sitting there plugging into a little Marshall amp. There's an entire craft art form here. So making good records is something that it's a skill you really need to have, period. I'll conclude here by saying a song that if you and I wrote a song today and it was on a piece of paper, and there it would be. But if we're going to play it for people, if we can make a nice recording of it that's particularly appropriate for the song, then that's what a person is going to hear. They're not going to listen to maybe us, sing it. Some of them might say, well, I really like that song. But the general public just doesn't give a hoot. The recording has to do, 60% of the job? I don't know.
It does. It's really tough to get it across. I feel like you've always been great at that. I mean, preparing for this interview yesterday, you were on my mind. And so my favorite song of yours is Sure Was Better Back Then. So I'm in the car, I'm singing that. My 3-year-old daughter's in the back seat and she heard me singing that. She never asked this, but she said, "Can I hear that song?" I said, "Sure." So I fired up on Spotify, the world's at my fingertips, put it on the car stereo. And this 3-year-old listens to it, and this doesn't happen to her with music. Some kids it does, some kids it doesn't. But she keyed in on this. And one of the things that I thought about goes to what you were just saying, which was, here you have a great song, but it was also realized in the medium of recorded music, so much so that it could still communicate with a child that was born, let's say 30 years after it was recorded. Like it still has an immediacy. It was still able to jump through the car speakers to reach her. So I know what you're talking about. I experienced it yesterday.
Yeah, and the real or key example is those freaking Beatles.
Yeah.
Because as the generations have gone by, my daughter Catherine's 27 now. She got to a point about 11 years old, and she picked up on the Beatles. And Catherine, she consumed the whole Beatle catalog in like a month. And she decided she really liked The Fool on the Hill and some things that, to her taste. I had a bunch of videos. She watched every one of them, and she just ate it up. It had that thing we're talking about. The records deliver so well, and they just have such magic that they may carry on for another couple of generations. I'm not sure.
There's so few people who even get to have a cup of coffee in the music business, spend a few years in it, put out a record, have some people listen to it. That's a very select club to begin with. The amount of people who get to do that and then spend, decade upon decade and then be, 67 years old with an album coming out next month. I mean, to call that group a select few is a complete understatement. Pretty much no one is able to do that. And yet here you are looking at that and thinking about that. For you, what has been the most rewarding part of spending a life in music?
Well, it's being able to pick the people you want to work with, and I always want that to be as pleasant. I know there's a lot to be said for friction. I've had friction with some record producers and stuff, but pleasant, and to go and play these. I love these clubs. I'm not worried about the fact that it's not Madison Square Garden. It's my mentality is to deal with that 200 people or less. I love it. It's very personable. It suits the kind of music I'm doing. And there you go, to pal around with fellow friends and George Naha on lead guitar in my band's excellent. Upright bass player Todd Lanka, he's excellent. Caleb Esty on drums, he's like 33 now. He's excellent. So, wow, that's great. As we used to say when I worked with the Skeletons out of Springfield, Missouri, it sure beats being a log sucker in a turkey plant. There you go. That's all there is to it.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, even though I don't know what a lug sucker is. So
a lung.
Oh, a lung sucker. Okay.
Yeah, you got there's a vacuum thing that comes down the line and you suck the lugs out of the carcass. Totally. It's horrific. So who wants to do that?
No, not I. Well, listen, I'm a huge fan of your music. I have been for many years, and it's an honor that you would come on the show, and I can't thank you enough.
Well, I thank you for these nice questions, and you know what you're talking about, and I appreciate it.
This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Steve Forbert's forthcoming album is entitled Moving Through America, set to be released on May 13th. The first 2 singles are out now. Find them at steveforbert.com. If before we meet again you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.